Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, November 12th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu here. This is the place where we bring you just the facts and we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. As we told you earlier this week, Jill is off today. I was off yesterday. We will finally be back together tomorrow, but you don't have to wait until tomorrow to get together with your coworkers. In fact, today is officially National Happy Hour Day. So if you don't have post-work plans, or these days, if you just want to extend lunch, for the rest of the day, you can blame National Happy Hour Day. A number of bars across the country may have special deals going for you this evening, so definitely check it out wherever you are. Also, before we get started here, a quick reminder that we are doing our quick audience survey, mo.news/feedback. Head over there, mo.news/feedback. We only get better if you tell us what we can be doing and tell us more about yourselves. So the Mo News feedback survey is ongoing right now. We've gotten a number of responses, but we haven't heard from all of you. So head over again to mo.news/feedback. You can do it on your phone. You can do it on your computer. You can do it during this podcast. You can do it after the podcast. mo.news/feedback. All right, let's get to today's headlines. Today might be the final day of the record-long government shutdown, but the delays at the airports continue to be felt across the country. How long it will take before things return to normal for flyers, for government workers, and for the rest of us. We're tracking a major recall when it comes to infant formula in the country. Just the latest hit. After a number of years, those infant formula shortages, now the recall will give you a state of play when it comes to the formula market. Another headline we're tracking, some of you may have a 15-year mortgage, some of you a 30-year mortgage. Well, President Trump is proposing a 50-year mortgage. We'll tell you what's behind the plan and whether it could actually become a reality at some point. We continue to track gerrymandering wars across the country. A big decision in Utah. It could add a Democratic congressional seat. We'll tell you about the fight and what comes next. The military buildup in the Caribbean continues as President Trump continues to weigh a potential military escalation against Venezuela. Some environmental news: as the largest polluter in the world, China's gas emissions continue to come down. We'll give you a state of play from the big climate change conference taking place in Brazil. And finally, actress Sydney Sweeney has been making a lot of news lately, but some bad news for her at the box office over the weekend. And of course, I'll end as always with On This Day in History, where there is one major headline I'll be sharing a personal anecdote from. But let's get started here in Washington, where House lawmakers are set to all be back in D.C. today to finally vote to reopen the government. That's, of course, if they can actually make their flights, arrive in Washington, and make it all the way to Capitol Hill. Because travel, again, was rough yesterday. Slightly better, though, than Monday. The FAA flight reductions were at about 6% yesterday, meaning we began the day with about 6% of flights already being canceled. Ultimately, yesterday, about 1 in 4 flights either experienced a delay or cancellation overall across the country, though that was actually a good number because the previous day on Monday, nearly half of all flights in America were either canceled or delayed. So a huge improvement yesterday. One of the things that helped: air traffic controllers, more of them back at work. DC airports running pretty smoothly yesterday, as it appears air traffic controllers looking to get members of Congress back to Capitol Hill. Clearly incentive there to get their back pay and reopen the government. That'll be a key thing we'll watch for. How quickly will all these government workers, especially the essential ones that have been working for the past 40 plus days, will get the back pay for the last more than a month that they've been at the job. Now, we will continue to watch these flight restrictions. The FAA had initial plans to cancel 10% of all flights starting tomorrow due to their concerns with air traffic controllers. But again, it appears they are back on the job, at least more of them back on the job. The Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, telling reporters yesterday that air traffic controllers who have gone without pay will get partial back pay very quickly. Here's a bit of what he said.
I believe that in this package to reopen the government, our controllers could be paid within 48 hours of the government opening. So they could, not all, I think it's a 70% payment, but they'll get a big lump sum of what they're due, which is helpful. They don't have to wait another 2 weeks to be paid.
Remember, a number of those air traffic controllers have been working side jobs, doing DoorDash, Uber, and other things to make ends meet during this shutdown. Some of them doing it beyond the 60 hours they already work every week as air traffic controllers, and some of them actually not showing up to their main job in order to pay the bills because they weren't getting paid. But even when the government reopens here, flight disruptions are expected to linger here in the coming days, potentially weeks here going into the Thanksgiving holiday. Remember, the U.S. is already short about 3,000 air traffic controllers going into all of this. That's nearly a quarter of what we need. And during the shutdown, as they experience stress after stress on top of what is already a stressful job, many of them are required to work 6 days a week, not take vacations. We saw a number of retirements, though they haven't made clear exactly how many people retired over the last month. So airlines are warning here of ripple effects that could go on into next week, go into the Thanksgiving holiday. So that's something to watch for if you're planning to travel here in the next couple of weeks. And remember, the end of the shutdown, still not a sure thing. We watch all of these votes very closely. Remember, back on Monday, the Senate passed a compromise measure that laid 8 senators who caucus with the Democrats to join the Republicans, despite the fact that the vast majority of Democrats, Democratic leadership, very much against this, but moderate Democrats, a handful of them saying, enough is enough here. We feel we need to reopen the government. They believe they got enough concessions from Republicans. And over in the House, where Speaker Mike Johnson has a very narrow majority, it is a very difficult group to manage. And so he's looking at President Trump here to potentially give him some support to make sure he can get it across the finish line today. And then President Trump will have to sign the legislation. Remember the way things work in Washington. The Senate has to pass it, the House has to pass it, and then the president has to sign it. So you may see the headline later today, if all things work out, that the shutdown, the longest in American history, is officially over. But that doesn't mean the fights in Washington stop. And that includes amongst and within the Democratic Party. Right now, as I mentioned, Democratic leadership not happy with those 8 moderate Democrats. They believe they should have held out longer. The polling was very much going against Trump and Republicans in recent weeks. You know, Democrats were fighting for a continuation of healthcare subsidies for Obamacare for 24 million Americans, many of whom might not be able to afford healthcare moving forward. They felt it was a key issue, one that they wanted to stand their ground on. But ultimately, 8 Democrats saying, well, Senate Republicans are promising to vote on an extension of those healthcare subsidies. And that's enough for us. We trust their word, but many Democrats saying they do not trust the Republicans, and they wanted a promise, they wanted a deal on extending healthcare subsidies before they voted to reopen the government. Once the government is reopened, they don't believe they'll have as much leverage with Republicans to get a compromise there on Obamacare. And that's just on the Senate side. Over on the House side, Speaker Johnson and Republicans are not making any promises about what they would vote on. So you see a lot of House Democrats not happy with the senators who crossed the line to work with Republicans to end the shutdown here. You saw one Democratic senator, Chris Murphy, argue on social media yesterday that he believes this whole deal leaves Trump even stronger, not weaker, after the 40-day plus shutdown. You're seeing some other Democrats saying that Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer should be out of a job after all of this. They believe he didn't hold his ground. He wasn't able to hold his caucus together. Now, one thing Democrats are happy about is now that the House is back in session, after nearly 2 months off the job, they will be swearing in their newest member, Adelita Grijalva. She's a member from Arizona who won an election over the summer. But the House hasn't reopened to let her come to work. She actually had to file a lawsuit against the Speaker of the House saying, ultimately, you need to swear me in. But Speaker Johnson saying, I can't make you official while there's a federal government shutdown. Now, technically, he could have, but he argued he couldn't. One of the reasons Democrats believe he declined to swear in the newest Democrat, she will be the 218th signature on a petition to force a bill that will require Trump's Justice Department to release the Epstein files. So this was a key vote. Democrats believe that Johnson, the Republican leader who's very loyal to Trump, was basically doing Trump's business here. He doesn't want to see a vote trying to force the Justice Department to bring Epstein back into the news after they dealt with it all summer. And so Grijalva, a key vote here. And now that she'll be sworn in, now that the House is back, look for some Epstein headlines here in the coming days. Now to another story that we are closely watching outside of politics. A major recall in the baby formula world. Organic baby formula maker ByHeart is voluntarily recalling all of its products. I know there's a number of you in the audience who use ByHeart. It comes after the FDA linked its formula to more than a dozen cases of infant food poisoning across the country. Federal officials saying at least 15 children as of Tuesday from ages 2 weeks old until 5 months were hospitalized after consuming ByHeart whole nutrition infant formula. It's part of a botulism outbreak that has taken place in at least 12 states since August, according to the CDC. Now, no deaths have been reported so far, but ByHeart and federal officials taking this very seriously. ByHeart yesterday officially expanding their voluntary recall of 2 lots of their formula, saying actually all of our products need to be recalled. And that was the announcement yesterday. That includes their powdered formula, their pouches. Definitely check out ByHeart's website if you're looking for more details on that. Now, the company notes that infant botulism has never been tied to infant formula in the past. Preliminary testing out in California by health officials there suggested the presence of the type of bacteria that could produce botulism in a can of their powdered formula. More testing is ongoing here. Now, infant botulism occurs when babies consume a type of bacteria that produces a toxin in their large intestines. The symptoms here to look out for: constipation, poor feeding, and drooping eyelids. Now, in very rare cases, it can lead to paralysis or death, but infant botulism is very treatable. The survival rate is upwards of 98 to 100%. The one thing to look out for, though, is that botulism can take weeks to develop, so the FDA is advising parents who have used ByHeart formula to keep a close eye on them here in the coming weeks. Now, while this recall is not expected to create a nationwide shortage like what we saw back in 2022 and 2023, it is a major blow to efforts that have been made in recent years to diversify and modernize the U.S. baby formula market. Now, ByHeart, pretty small when it comes to the market. They account for about 1% of infant formula sold in the US, according to the FDA. But what is notable is that ByHeart is one of the few companies, few US brands trying to innovate and grow in a formula market that has long been dominated by just a handful of companies using decades-old recipes. It became clear just how fragile the baby formula market was back in 2022 when an Abbott nutrition plant was shut down, and that triggered nationwide shortages. Since then, the FDA has stepped up oversight, developed new strategies to prevent bacterial contamination. That's according to a recent report. The agency says that it's also working to diversify and stabilize the formula market by supporting new manufacturers and aligning U.S. standards more closely with international ones. Now, even with these efforts ongoing, the industry still remains highly reliant on just a handful of producers. Back in March, Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. launched what he calls Operation Stork Speed. It is the first comprehensive review of infant formula nutrition standards since 1998, and the plan is to use the results of that to help modernize and strengthen supply security, something we're closely watching. All right, now time for today's speed read from the Mo newsletter. For all the people who can't afford to buy in this very challenging housing market, President Trump pitched a new solution over the weekend, a 50-year mortgage loan. Now, that adds about 20 years to the traditional 30-year mortgage, and the proposal is getting a lot of pushback from consumer finance experts, folks in real estate, as well as folks in his MAGA base. First, take a listen to how Trump framed the new 50-year mortgage plan in an interview with Fox News' Laura Ingraham on Monday.
All it means is you pay less per month. You pay it over a longer period of time. It's not like a big factor. It might help a little bit.
Now, while a 50-year mortgage would mean, yes, smaller payments, a slightly smaller payment every month, it would mean more money in interest to the banks over time. So here's an example for you. If you're buying a $450,000 home with a current 6.2% interest rate, that would account for about monthly payments of $2,700 a month on a 30-year mortgage. Over the life of those 30 years, you would end up paying $550,000 in interest over the life of that loan, on top, of course, the $450,000 for the home itself. Now, stretching your 30-year mortgage to a 50-year mortgage, well, that would drop payments by about $200 a month down to $2,500 a month. So savings there, slight savings there, but your total interest over 50 years versus 30 years would soar to $1 million, $1 million in interest on a home that is slightly less than $500,000. And that's the key issue here that a number of consumer finance experts brought up, is that it would just ultimately skyrocket the amount you pay for that same home over time while only saving you a little bit every month. Now, homeownership, a key issue here. We told you last week that the median age of the first-time home buyer in the U.S. is now 40 years old. 20 years ago, it was 28 years old. Now, a 40-year-old is the average person buying their first home. And so that has led to a larger discussion here about what can be done. And so apparently there was a discussion over the weekend between President Trump and some folks around him about introducing the 50-year mortgage. Now, just to give you some history here, the 30-year mortgage was introduced by FDR, by President Roosevelt, back in the 30s during the Great Depression in order to allow people to buy homes over a 30-year timeline. So Trump's saying here, why can't we take that up to 50 years? Now, legally speaking, you can't. Right now, federal law says that loan terms cannot exceed 30 years. That measure was passed back in 2008. So he would need to take this before Congress. And again, it is getting a lot of backlash on the left, but also a lot of backlash on the right. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has increasingly emerged as somebody very critical of Trump lately, says that this is a move that will ultimately reward the banks, mortgage lenders, and home builders, and just lead people to have to pay more. A lot of conservatives online arguing this just means your house will be owned by the bank until you die. And after, we don't need 50-year mortgages. And so you saw a lot of backlash from the right. Not clear how far this plan will go. Next up, we have the latest in the gerrymandering wars ahead of next year's midterms as states have been redrawing congressional districts. This is the latest from the Utah News Dispatch. A judge this week in Utah rejecting new congressional district lines drawn by Republican lawmakers in the state in recent years. As of right now, there will now be one solidly Democratic seat in Utah out of their 4 total congressional seats ahead of next year's midterm elections. Now, just to put this in context, this has been a fight that's been going on since 2018 in Utah. That's when voters there, a majority of voters, decided they didn't want partisanship, they didn't want politics to be a part of congressional district lines. But nonetheless, the Republican legislature there drew a map that continued the trend line of splitting Salt Lake City into 4 pieces. So effectively taking a piece of what is a solidly liberal Democratic area and taking a piece of it and putting it into 4 different districts combined with rural areas of Utah, basically guaranteeing that there will be 4 Republican seats, 4 red seats moving forward. Well, there were lawsuits regarding that map, and that led to a decision this week by Judge Diana Gibson in Utah, ruling that the Republican-backed map splitting Salt Lake City into 4 different districts, 4 guaranteed Republican districts, well, that is breaking the law and effectively going against the referendum that a majority of Utah voters voted for back in 2018. What has been approved by the judge now is a redrawing of the map that effectively has 3 very large districts and then 1 district that represents most of the northern part of Salt Lake City. Based on voting trends, that will be a blue district. The judge found that lawmakers broke the law here in terms of how they drew the map and said there is no reason that you should be splitting Salt Lake City this way. Now, this is pretty common in a number of other states. You see this in Chicago as they have split Chicago in certain ways. Democrats there have to ensure there are as many blue districts as possible, combining parts of Chicago with rural areas of Illinois. You see the same thing on the other side. In Texas, where they have split up a city like Austin and Houston into multiple slices of a pie, ensuring that what would be a majority Democratic area with multiple blue seats is split amongst a number of red seats. But they've drawn a line here in Utah. Voters have, and the judge basically found that the voters who sued here were in the right, that the Republican-controlled legislature was in the wrong. Now, Utah Republicans are rejecting the judge's ruling. They called it an activist map decision. They call it a direct threat to our constitutional order. But for now, they will have to follow through with the ruling here. And that means, as we've been watching the state-by-state battle here, that Utah, this long-time loss that's been happening, will add a Democratic seat in a year that is seeing a number of states already redrawing their maps for the Republicans. So Utah aside here, again, that was a lawsuit that is a long time in coming. Many Utah residents who follow Mo News telling us this was just about fairness, not about partisanship. It wasn't about getting, certain number of blue seats, certain number of red seats, but that they've had enough with partisanship in Utah and they want politics out of the decisions when it comes to congressional redistricting. But nationally, it's been the opposite case. This has been touched off by the Trump White House this year, saying that the president, saying that he wants to see Republican states redraw districts to benefit the party Remember, a key midterm is coming up next year. It's a midterm when typically the sitting president sees losses. There's a very slim majority Republicans have in the U.S. House. And so any state that can redraw its lines to potentially add a Republican here or a Republican there would be extremely useful to the president. We saw that plainly in Texas, where the legislature there has redrawn the map to add what looks like could be 5 new red districts and knock out 5 Democrats. You saw that in North Carolina, that's +1 Republican. You saw that in Missouri with a +1 Republican. So far, it looks like Republicans are +7. You also saw a decision in Ohio this week that looks like they're going to redraw things to add 2 more Republicans. So you could be at +9. On the Democratic side, you saw the big vote earlier this month in California, where you saw voters effectively as pushback to Texas vote for the power for the Democratic legislature there in California to redraw lines and add 5 Democratic seats in a state that's already pretty overwhelmingly gerrymandered and pretty Democratic. Well, they're adding 5 to counter Texas's 5. Now you have Utah, due to this lawsuit, looking like it's going to add a Democratic seat. So that's +6 for Democrats versus +7 for Republicans. Again, there's Ohio, as I mentioned, which could be another 2 for Republicans. Then you have states like Indiana and Florida that are looking at adding Republican seats. You have states like Illinois, New York, and potentially Maryland looking at adding Democratic seats. So this is not over here, not in the slightest, but an interesting move in Utah against the backdrop of all of the various gerrymandering that's happening this year. Again, that is not considered a mid-decade re-gerrymander or rare gerrymander as what we're seeing in other states. This was a long time in coming based on this lawsuit that alleged the Republicans have gone too far with their map and a judge standing with the folks who filed that lawsuit. All right, our next story comes to us from the Washington Post. The largest aircraft carrier in the world has arrived in the area around the Caribbean. It is the USS Gerald Ford, and it joins the naval buildup that has not been seen in the region in decades. You got to go back to the 80s or the 60s, frankly, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, to see this many naval ships, U.S. naval ships, in the Caribbean. It comes as the Trump administration has upped its series of deadly strikes on alleged drug smuggling boats in international waters. The administration claiming it is in the legal right here, but many members of Congress, Democrats, and some Republicans worried about the precedent they're setting here, what standard of proof they have, and frankly, in some cases, the lack of proof when it comes to who they've been striking. There have been 19 military strikes, killing 75 people so far in the last couple months in the Caribbean, as well as the Eastern Pacific. The big push for the Trump administration has been the drug cartels. They claim these are drug runners. But ultimately, as you see these warships arriving in the Caribbean, it's fueling speculation that it's not just about drug running anymore, but about potential regime change in Venezuela. That's where Nicolas Maduro, the dictator, has been ruling the country for more than a decade. There was a fair election last year that he lost, but he decided to stay in power anyway. And so over time here, you have increasing frustration from the U.S. You also have the fact that the White House alleges that Maduro is basically running one of the cartels out of Venezuela. And so you've seen this escalation. The USS Gerald R. Ford is there. You also have 8 other warships, a nuclear submarine, F-35 jets, and 10,000 U.S. naval and marine personnel who've been deployed to the region in recent months. Now, one thing the administration is saying, they're calling these narco-terrorists, and they're approaching the war on drugs in the same way we've been approaching for the past 20 plus years, the war on terrorism. That when you see a threat, you take it out, no matter where it is in the world. And so that philosophy has been taken now to Latin America. The big question is, what comes next? Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio gave a classified briefing to select members of Congress last week. And the public feedback we got from some of those legislators is that there is concern about where this mission could lead next. The big question, of course, is what will President Trump decide? He's certainly hearing from some people that don't want to see intervention. He is hearing from some people internally who do want to see intervention and say that the majority of Venezuelans do not support Maduro, and that if you found a way to pressure him to leave power or took him out in some sort of military operation, that the vast majority of Venezuelans would be very happy with that move. There is a natural leader who can take over. Maria Machado, she's the woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize, who, based on international observers, won last year's election and has been sort of waiting for Maduro to push out here. So you do have some people within the administration arguing that this would be similar to the 1989 operation the U.S. undertook to take out the Panamanian leader named Manuel Noriega. He was also drug running. The U.S. arrested him, and Panama was able to transition after that operation into democracy. But the U.S. also does have a long history of failed regime change in Latin America and the rest of the world. So we'll continue to watch the situation in Venezuela as the U.S. military forces continue to grow there. All right, some environmental news from Semaphore. China's greenhouse gas emissions have been flat or falling for a year and a half, according to new data. It comes as leaders from nearly 200 nations have gathered for the UN's 30th climate change conference. It's called COP30. It's taking place in Brazil right now. Now, one major absence from COP30 is the US, or at least federal officials from the US. No one from the Trump administration has attended the conference. Now, historically speaking, the US has been a part of most of the previous COP summits. And remember that the US per capita is the largest polluter in the world per person. But overall, when you look at just raw numbers, China is the largest polluter. And that's why some of their numbers are notable here. Their emissions are trending down. It's been driven, though, partially by the economic slowdown in China. Construction and manufacturing sectors are down, but they've also been really investing in China in renewable energy, electrification of the economy. Remember, pollution is really bad there. So there has been this pivot in recent years to new energy, this construction of major solar fields in the Chinese deserts. The world's biggest polluter has built more than 300 gigawatts of solar and wind capacity so far this year alone. Just to give you context on what 300 gigawatts is, that is 5 times the entire renewable energy capacity of the entire UK. So everything the UK has built ever, well, the Chinese in just less than a year have built 5 times that amount. So they're moving fast in China to transition their economy. But notably, they're also absent from this COP30 summit, along with the US and India, which is the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So it's effectively the 4th largest polluter on down that's actually attending the climate conference here in Brazil. Now, there are some Americans attending this summit. They include 2 Democratic governors, Gavin Newsom from California and New Mexico's governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham. They're representing state-level U.S. efforts to curb emissions. We've seen that. We saw it in the first Trump term. We've seen it in the second Trump term, where because the feds have decided to get out of the game, remember Trump's big push is drill, baby, drill, coal, oil, the OG energy sources. You have seen some Democratic states take clean energy initiatives on their own. So you see the governors there of New Mexico and California down there in Brazil. Trump has pledged to remove the U.S. from the International Treaty on Climate Change that was adopted back in 2015, the Paris Agreement. He did so during his first term. Biden rejoined it. Trump pulled us out again. That is the agreement that 190 countries around the world have made to limit global warming to just 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That's seen as, sort of, you don't want to cross that threshold because ultimately the ramifications, the impact on the global environment above warming the Earth 2 degrees is a problem. Now, we have seen in a couple summers, we have hit that 2-degree mark. Nonetheless, there has been some progress in a number of countries around the world, particularly these countries that are attending this COP30 summit. And one notable thing that we should emphasize here, in the first half of this year, renewable energy sources overtook coal as the top source of global electricity for the first time ever. So globally here, you are seeing an impact in the US. You're certainly seeing things at the state level. And China, despite the fact that it's not attending this summit and hasn't signed on to certain agreements and is the world's largest polluter, they're also making a push into renewables. All right, and finally, here's some entertainment news from The Wrap. It was not a very good weekend for Sydney Sweeney at the box office. Her new film, Christie, opened in 2,000 theaters over the weekend. It only brought in $1.3 million. That's one of the worst nationwide debuts we've ever seen for a wide release. Now, frankly, I hadn't heard about this, and there's a reason why, which we'll get to in a second. First background here. Christie is a film. It's a boxing drama about a 1990s fighter named Christy Martin. She was a pioneer in women's boxing. Sweeney plays Martin in the film, who has quite a story, including surviving a murder attempt by her husband and trainer. Now, the reviews were not very good. It got a 66% on Rotten Tomatoes. The slow opening weekend for Christie ranks the movie among the 10 worst openings for films on more than 2,000 screens ever. Sweeney wrote a lengthy Instagram post saying, quote, "We don't always make art for numbers. We make it for impact. Christie has been the most impactful project of my life." Now, One reason I didn't even know this came out, despite Sweeney making headlines, is that her press tour, very much in recent weeks, hasn't really focused on the film. Some of you might have seen the Instagram video we put out last week from the interview she did with GQ magazine. I didn't even realize Sydney Sweeney was promoting a movie. The focus of that interview, or at least the section of the interview that got the most headlines, was the question she faced about that American Eagle ad, that jeans ad that she did earlier this year, that said Sydney Sweeney has great jeans. It was a play on jeans, Genes, not just jeans like blue jeans. That led to a whole controversy, though those jeans sold out. American Eagle stock skyrocketed. You saw President Trump come to her defense. So a lot of politics there. Nonetheless, on her press tour, she's been talking about that, talking about other things. So many people probably not even realizing the movie was out, but those who have, clearly the reviews aren't great either. But Sweeney's not slowing down anytime soon. She's got a thriller called The Housemaid hitting theaters in December, and then she will have a role in the Devil Wears Prada sequel next May. All right, now we end, as always, with On This Day in History. On this day in 1927, Joseph Stalin becomes the head of the Soviet Union after Leon Trotsky is expelled from the Communist Party. Stalin would go on to rule the Soviet Union for 24 years. We should note Vladimir Putin, set to surpass him relatively soon as the longest-running modern leader of Russia. On this day in 1954, after processing more than 12 million immigrants over 60 years, Ellis Island officially closed on this day in 1954 as an immigration station and detention center. I should say, like many of you in the audience who might have a personal connection to Ellis Island, I found paperwork recently from my grandfather, my mother's father, who came through Ellis Island as a young boy on a boat called the Cherbourg in January of 1939. Just 6 months before World War II, he had been born in Germany and luckily was one of the Jews who was able to escape. On this day in pop culture history, 1966, the Monkees release I'm a Believer. On this date in 1984, Madonna releases her second album, Like a Virgin. On this day in 2002, Missy Elliott releases her album Under Construction, which includes Work It and Gossip Folks, a couple of my favorites from Missy. And 22 years ago today, Britney Spears released In the Zone. That included Me Against the Music and Toxic, among other hits there from Britney. All right, I want to thank you for listening to a solo edition of the podcast. Hope I kept it moving for all of you. Looking forward to having Jill back tomorrow for the regular back and forth. But I want to thank you again for listening to the podcast. If you like what you hear, please leave a review, especially if you're an Apple listener. Those reviews matter. Spotify as well. So appreciate all of you. And if you value our news coverage, consider joining Mo News Premium. It's a way to support what we're doing, support what we're doing as an independent news outlet. We are majority supported by all of you. So it ensures we can continue to keep going and growing and doing interviews and widening out our coverage. Joining Mo News Premium is just $9 a month or $99 a year. We also have discounted group and family rates. We also have education rates for students and teachers. So you can check that all out over at mo.news/premium. Once you become a premium member, you get weekend coverage. You get exclusive weekly podcasts where I answer your questions. You get all other interviews first. You get monthly workshops where we do live deep dives into various subjects. You join the Slack channel where you get to talk to thousands of your fellow community members about the news or other topics, as well as those of us on the Mo News team. There's just a lot happening over on the Mo News Premium side. So check that out over again at mo.news/premium. And I will see all of you back here tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.